The Galactic Council chamber was a monument to unity, its crystalline dome refracting sunlight into a kaleidoscope of colors that bathed the room in ethereal beauty. Yet today the brilliance seemed hollow. The chamber's vast expanse, with its sweeping tiers of curved seating, felt more like an arena than a sanctuary. Over 1,000 alien representatives sat in tense silence, their gazes flicking uneasily between one another. The air hummed with an electric anticipation, heavy and stifling, as if the galaxy itself held its breath. The scent of ozone, sharp and metallic, drifted from the holographic emitters scattered across the chamber. They flickered to life one by one, their blue light casting ghostly glows on alien faces of every shape and hue. Tentacles writhed, scales glistened, and feathery antennae quivered as the council waited for the session to begin. A faint buzz of whispers echoed through the chamber, an undercurrent of worry, a tide of questions no one dared voice aloud. At the center of the chamber, the human delegation stood out in its simplicity. No ornate robes or glowing emblems adorned them, just crisp black uniforms devoid of insignia. Commander Eli Grant sat at the forefront, his posture relaxed, yet his steel-gray eyes betrayed a sharpness that hadn't dulled with years of diplomacy. His clean-shaven face bore the faint shadow of a scar along his jaw, a souvenir from a past life before he donned the mantle of humanity's ambassador. Next to him stood Lieutenant Nadia Aker, a young officer whose expression remained unreadable, though her fingers twitched ever so slightly at her side. The air in the chamber shifted. It was subtle at first, a tightening, a slow coiling of something unseen. The council leader, a towering insectoid with chitinous plating that gleamed in the refracted light, rose from their central podium. Their mandibles clicked rhythmically, and their translator emitted a soothing monotone. Today, we convene not for peace, but for grave deliberation. The Stellar Empire has requested an emergency session. The murmur of whispers ceased as silence clamped down, heavy and absolute. The room dimmed as the central holographic platform flared to life. The flickering blue light coalesced into the form of High Commander Varok of the Stellar Empire. His towering frame was humanoid, but his ash-gray skin shimmered with a metallic sheen, and his 4 crimson eyes glared out at the assembly. His arms were crossed over his chest, a gesture that alien delegates recognized as unmistakably aggressive. The faint hum of static accompanied his voice as it thundered through the chamber. For 3 millennia, this council has governed with the naive assumption that peace is eternal, Varok began, his voice a low, rumbling growl that made the crystalline dome tremble faintly. For 3 millennia, we have endured your squabbles, your indecision, and your complacency. But today, the Stellar Empire declares this peace over. A gasp rippled through the chamber, the sound like a wind rushing through a dense forest. Representatives from a dozen species leaned forward, their translator devices echoing Varok's declaration in a cacophony of languages. The faint scent of something sweet and acrid filled the air as one avian delegate spilled a drink in shock, its glass clattering against the polished floor. Commander Grant tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. His fingers drummed once, lightly, against the armrest of his chair. Beside him, Lieutenant Aker's eyes darted toward him, searching for any sign of reaction, but Grant remained still, his face a mask of calm. Varok's hologram leaned forward, his crimson eyes narrowing. "Humanity," he said, spitting the word like a curse. "You have hidden behind the Council's treaties for too long, coddled by the protection of species greater than yourselves. You are weak, you are primitive, and you are a threat to the stability of the galaxy." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The faint hum of the holographic emitters grew louder, grating against the nerves of those present. Grant finally moved, leaning forward slightly, his face illuminated by the cold blue glow of the hologram. "High Commander Varok," he began, his voice smooth and unhurried, like the first stirrings of a distant storm. "That's quite the statement to make. Declaring war in this chamber, how bold of you. Are you certain this is the stage for such theatrics?" Varok's hologram flickered with what seemed to be a sneer. "Theatrics? This is not a performance, human. This is the truth. The Stellar Empire has had enough of your insolence. We hereby demand the unconditional surrender of Earth and its colonies." The words struck the chamber like a thunderclap. The delegates erupted into chaos. Feathery appendages waved wildly, tentacles slammed against the ground, and guttural roars reverberated from the reptilian factions. The noise swelled, a deafening roar of protest and panic. Some representatives rose from their seats, shouting protests in their native tongues, while others huddled together, whispering frantically. And through it all, Grant laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, nor was it mocking. It was soft, almost understated, a chuckle that rolled out of his chest and echoed faintly in the stunned silence that followed. The alien delegates froze, their eyes wide and uncomprehending. Varok's hologram flared with rage. "You dare mock the stellar empire?" he roared, his voice vibrating the air like a low drumbeat. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with?" Grant rose to his feet, smoothing the creases in his uniform. His movements were deliberate, unhurried. He took a moment to survey the room, his gaze lingering on each delegate. Some stared back with pity, others with disbelief, and then his eyes locked with Varok's. "Mock you?" Grant's voice was quiet but carried with the weight of iron. "No, High Commander, I'm not mocking you. I'm merely amused." Varok's hologram shifted, his arms uncrossing in a clear sign of irritation. "Amused? By what, human? By your impending destruction?" Grant's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Amused," he said, "by how confidently you underestimate us." The chamber fell silent again. Grant stepped forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor. The sound was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. He stopped at the edge of the holographic platform, his silhouette outlined against the glowing figure of Varok. "You see, High Commander," Grant continued, his tone almost conversational, "humanity has always had a saying, 'Let them think you are weak until it's time to show them how strong you are.'" A ripple of unease passed through the alien delegates. Grant reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black device. With a single tap, every holographic emitter in the chamber flickered and dimmed. For a heartbeat, the room was plunged into darkness. Then the screens illuminated again, this time displaying an image that froze the blood of every alien present. Hundreds of human warships emerged from the darkness of space, their sleek, predatory forms glowing with the reflected light of distant stars. These were not the bulky, outdated vessels humanity had paraded for the Council. These were weapons of war, silent, deadly, and undeniably advanced. The faint hum of the emitters seemed to mirror the pounding of hearts as Grant turned back to the chamber. His voice, calm and unyielding, cut through the silence. "You wanted war, High Commander?" he said, his smile now razor-sharp. "You've got it." The image of the fleet lingered on the screens as the chapter ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence and the reader on the edge of their seat. The crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber seemed dimmer now, its light unable to penetrate the collective unease. The image of humanity's fleet still hung on the central display, casting long shadows across the alien representatives. High Commander Varok's hologram trembled, flickering as if the technology itself mirrored his fury. "You think this display frightens us?" Varok snarled, his voice vibrating with restrained rage. "A few polished ships and some holographic theatrics? The stellar empires might will crush you like insects underfoot." Commander Eli Grant stood unwavering, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. His silhouette was a sharp contrast against the hologram, his stillness unnerving. He tilted his head slightly, his gray eyes gleaming like tempered steel. "Crush us, then," Grant said, his tone as calm as a surgeon's hand. "But remember, High Commander, humanity never picks a fight it hasn't already planned to win." Varok's image flared brighter for an instant, then vanished, leaving the chamber bathed in uneasy silence. The alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their gazes darting toward Grant and the now empty hologram. The scent of fear hung faintly in the air, sharp and acrid like burned wires. Grant turned to his aide, Lieutenant Nadia Aker, her face pale but composed. "It begins," he said quietly, his words carrying the weight of inevitability. Aker nodded, her fingers hovering over the comm link clipped to her wrist. "Shall I alert the fleet, sir?" "Not yet. Grant replied, his voice dropping into a near whisper. "We let them move first. That's the mistake they're bound to make." The council session dissolved into chaos as alien representatives broke into heated debates, the room filled with overlapping voices, some in support of humanity, others condemning their secrecy. Grant didn't wait to hear the rest. He gave a curt nod to Acre, and they strode out of the chamber together, their boots echoing like hammer blows on the polished floor. Outside, the air was cooler, tinged with the earthy aroma of the massive gardens surrounding the council spire. A faint breeze carried the rustle of alien flora, their bioluminescent petals flickering like dying stars. Grant paused, inhaling deeply as if trying to cleanse the tension clinging to him. "Do you think they'll take the bait?" Acre asked, breaking the silence. Grant's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Oh, they'll bite. Varok's pride is as predictable as gravity." They made their way to the docking bay, where the sleek, angular form of the Resolute Dawn awaited them. Its black hull absorbed the ambient light, making it appear as though it had been carved from the void itself. The faint hum of its quantum engines thrummed in the air, a reminder of the power hidden within. Inside the ship, the command deck was a hive of activity. Officers in crisp uniforms moved with practiced precision, their movements a blend of discipline and urgency. The room smelled of ozone and polished metal, the sterile scent of advanced machinery at work. Grant stepped onto the raised platform at the center, his presence drawing the attention of the crew. "Status report," he ordered. Lieutenant Commander Ivan Volkov, a stocky man with a grizzled beard and a voice like crushed gravel, turned from his console. "Empire fleet is on the move. We're picking up mass deployments along their outer colonies. Looks like they're amassing near Proxima Prime." Grant leaned over the holographic display, the translucent map of the galaxy glowing beneath his hands. Blue dots marked human forces, sparse and strategically spaced, while red clusters represented the swelling presence of the stellar empire. "They're committing too much too quickly," Volkov continued, a grim smirk tugging at his lips. "They think they'll overwhelm us with numbers." "That's the plan," Grant murmured. His gaze lingered on the red clusters, his mind racing through probabilities and contingencies. "They're playing checkers on a chessboard." Volkov chuckled darkly. "And we've been stacking the deck for years." Acre stepped forward, her tone edged with unease. "Do we reveal anything yet, sir? Or keep holding back?" Grant's eyes flicked to her, his expression unreadable. "We show them exactly what they expect to see. No more, no less. Let them believe they're cornering a wounded animal." He straightened, his voice rising enough to fill the command deck. "Prepare defensive positions along the outer colonies. Deploy the decoy fleets. I want them scattered enough to look vulnerable, but close enough to respond when the time comes." "Yes, sir," Volkov replied, already issuing commands to his team. Grant turned back to the holographic display, his fingers brushing against the glowing edges of Earth's defensive grid. The grid itself was a masterpiece of misdirection, a mix of outdated satellites and innocuous mining stations concealing deadly weapon platforms. It was a house of mirrors, designed to reflect and distort any enemy's approach. "They'll come hard and fast," Grant said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "But they'll come blind." The room fell into a steady rhythm, the hum of machinery blending with the low voices of officers relaying orders. The flicker of holographic displays painted the crew in shades of blue and gold, like soldiers forged in fire and frost. Hours later, Grant sat alone in his quarters, the soft glow of the viewport illuminating his face. Beyond the glass, the stars stretched endlessly, cold and indifferent. The silence here was different, thick, almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional distant thrum of the ship's engines. A small, weathered photograph sat on the desk before him. It was a snapshot of Earth, taken from orbit, the blue marble cradled in the darkness of space. It wasn't the planet itself that held his attention, but the handwritten note scrawled in the margin. "Never forget what we're fighting for." His fingers brushed against the photo's edge as memories stirred. The laughter of children in a sunlit park, the smell of rain on concrete, the warmth of a crowded room filled with people who believed in something greater than themselves. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. War was never about victory alone. It was about ensuring there was something left worth returning to. The comm link on his wrist chimed, pulling him from his thoughts. He tapped it, and Volkov's voice crackled through. "Empire fleet has reached Proxima Prime, sir. They're positioning for an attack." Grant rose, his movements deliberate. The weight of the moment settled over him, heavy and unyielding. "Good," he said, his voice cold and resolute. "Let them come." As he stepped back onto the command deck, the tension in the air was palpable. Officers snapped to attention as he entered, their faces a mix of determination and quiet fear. The holographic display now showed the Empire's fleet closing in on Proxima Prime, a wall of red dots advancing like an unstoppable tide. Grant stood at the center, his presence commanding. "Activate Phase 1, he ordered. "Let's see how well they handle the storm." A ripple of acknowledgement swept through the room. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, the low hum of the ship's engines growing into a steady, pulsing rhythm. On the holographic map, blue markers began to shift, converging with a precision that was almost surgical. Grant's gaze remained fixed on the display, his expression unreadable. Somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of footsteps reverberated, a steady drumbeat that seemed to mirror the cadence of his thoughts. "War isn't won in the first strike," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "It's won in the space between their overconfidence and our patience." And as the first volleys of energy weapons lit up the void of space, humanity's true game began. The void of space erupted with light. Proxima Prime's orbit became a maelstrom of chaos as the stellar empire's warships surged forward like a tidal wave, their energy weapons lashing out with violent precision. Beams of radiant plasma screamed through the blackness, slicing the darkness with blinding intensity. The silence of the vacuum belied the fury of the assault, though vibrations rippled through the resolute dawn as the shock waves from distant detonations reached its hull. On the command deck, Commander Eli Grant stood in the eye of the storm. The holographic display before him was alive with motion. Red markers surged toward blue in an uneven dance of violence and desperation. His gray eyes narrowed, calculating the movements of the enemy fleet with surgical precision. "They're scattering their forces," Lieutenant Commander Ivan Volkov growled, his deep voice barely masking his frustration. "They're probing for weaknesses." Grant's lips tightened into a thin line. "Let them. They'll find exactly what we want them to." Across the deck, Lieutenant Nadia Aker's hands flew over her console, her expression taut with focus. "Proxima's defensive grid is holding, but it won't last much longer. Their primary dreadnoughts are targeting the central energy hubs." Grant leaned closer to the holographic display, his voice calm but unyielding. "Activate the decoy array. Let's see if they're paying attention." Aker nodded sharply. Moments later, a cluster of outdated satellites orbiting Proxima flickered to life. From a distance, they appeared to emit high-energy signals, an illusion meticulously crafted to mimic the output of critical infrastructure. Within seconds, the Empire's warships adjusted their trajectories, their weapons shifting to target the decoys. Grant watched the display, his mind already moving several steps ahead. The faint scent of burning electronics lingered in the air, a byproduct of the ship's overclocked systems. The air thrummed with tension, every officer on the deck hyper-aware of the stakes. "They're taking the bait," Volkov muttered, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "For now," Grant replied. "But they'll adapt. They always do." The resolute dawn shuddered as another distant explosion rocked the battlefield. Grant's gaze flicked to the viewport, where Proxima Prime's surface gleamed like a gem amidst the chaos. Columns of light, both weapon strikes and defensive countermeasures, pierced its atmosphere, a testament to the planet's determination to survive. "Deploy the strikers," Grant ordered. "Make it look desperate." Aker hesitated for a fraction of a second before relaying the command. Moments later, a squadron of smaller human vessels broke formation, their engines flaring as they accelerated toward the heart of the enemy fleet. Their movements were erratic, almost reckless, Exactly as planned. The Empire's ships responded with brutal efficiency, concentrating fire on the incoming strikers. Explosions erupted in the void, the sharp bursts of light searing the darkness like the final moments of a dying star. But even as some of the strikers fell, the others slipped through, weaving between the Empire's formations with deceptive ease. Grant's fingers tapped against the edge of the display, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of every decision, every life lost. Yet he couldn't falter now. War was a symphony of sacrifice, and he was its conductor. "Status on the Aegis array?" he asked, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. Aker's brow furrowed. "Almost in position, sir. Another 5 minutes." "Make it 3, Grant said sharply. "They'll figure out the decoys sooner than we'd like." Volkov's gaze darkened. "If they get past Proxima, it's a straight shot to the colonies. We can't afford any gaps." "We won't have gaps," Grant said, his tone brooking no argument. "Focus on the task at hand." Another explosion lit the viewport, closer this time. The Resolute Dawn vibrated violently, its shields flaring with a burst of blue energy. The metallic tang of ionized air filled the deck, and warning lights flickered briefly before stabilizing. "They're moving into formation Gamma," Volkov said, his fingers dancing across his console. "Looks like they're setting up for a pincer maneuver." "Perfect," Grant murmured. "Ready phase 2. Aker's eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure, sir?" "I'm sure," Grant interrupted, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Execute." The command deck buzzed with activity as officers scrambled to carry out his orders. On the holographic display, several human vessels shifted their positions, their trajectories calculated to draw the Empire's forces into a specific corridor of space. It was a gamble, one that relied on the Empire's predictable arrogance. "High Commander Varok isn't the type to hesitate," Grant said, more to himself than anyone else. "He'll press the advantage the moment he thinks he has it." Volkov chuckled darkly. "And we'll be ready when he does." The tension in the air was palpable, a living thing that coiled around every officer on the deck. The faint hum of the ship's system seemed louder now, the vibrations coursing through the floor like a heartbeat. Every breath felt heavier, every movement sharper. Grant's gaze remained fixed on the display, even as his thoughts drifted. He could almost hear the echoes of past battles, the screams, the silence, the sharp sting of loss. War was a cruel teacher, but it had taught him well. "They're committing their capital ships," Aker said, her voice laced with urgency. "They're heading straight for the decoy array." "Good," Grant replied. "Initiate phase 3, and bring the Aegis array online." The deck erupted into controlled chaos as the officers worked in unison. Outside, the battlefield shifted. From the darkness of Proxima's orbit, a new formation of human vessels emerged. Sleek, angular ships that bristled with weaponry. They moved with precision, cutting through the void like knives through silk. The Empire's ships faltered for a moment, their formations wavering as they registered the unexpected reinforcements. But then Varok's forces surged forward, their arrogance undeterred. Grant allowed himself a small smile. "Now," he said quietly. The Aegis array activated, its hidden emitters flaring to life. Invisible beams of energy swept through the battlefield, disrupting the Empire's communications and targeting systems. Their ships stumbled, their weapons firing wildly into the void. Chaos rippled through the enemy fleet, their meticulously crafted strategies unraveling in an instant. Human ships capitalized on the confusion, striking with surgical precision. Explosions erupted across the battlefield, the light searing through the darkness like a sunrise on a shattered horizon. But even as the tide turned, Grant's mind remained restless. Victory here was only the beginning. The Empire's forces were vast, and Proxima was just a single piece on the board. "What's our next move?" Volkov asked, his voice low. Grant's gaze darkened as he stared at the flickering red markers on the display. "We push them back, but we don't show our hand yet." "And after that?" Aker pressed. Grant's expression hardened. "We wait for Varok's next move. He thinks he's playing a game of conquest. Let's remind him he's walking into a trap." The deck fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the crew. Outside, The battle continued, but the tide was shifting. Humanity's gambit was working for now. But the true test was yet to come. As Grant watched the enemy fleet struggle against their unraveling strategy, he felt a pang of unease. The Stellar Empire wasn't the type to retreat without a plan. Somewhere beyond the chaos, Varok was watching, waiting, and Grant knew the storm was far from over. The bridge of the Resolute Dawn thrummed with a restless energy, every sound and motion vibrating through the bones of those aboard. Commander Eli Grant stood at the holographic display, his hands clasped tightly behind his back as he stared at the glowing map of Proxima Prime's orbital theater. The enemy fleet was regrouping, their fractured lines coalescing into something far more dangerous, a spearhead aimed directly at humanity's last line of defense. Grant's voice cut through the tense hum of the command deck. Status on Varok's fleet? Lieutenant Nadia Akers' fingers flew over her console, the glow from the interface painting her face in harsh blue. They've pulled back their vanguard, sir. Capital ships are repositioning. Looks like they're forming a primary assault line. Grant's jaw tightened. The faint scent of scorched circuits lingered in the air, a byproduct of the ship's overclocked systems. He could feel the heat emanating from the consoles, the weight of countless lives pressing down on his shoulders. Good, he said, his tone clipped. They're committing everything. That's what we've been waiting for. Lieutenant Commander Ivan Volkov leaned over his station, his grizzled face illuminated by the holographic display. They're not holding back this time. Their dreadnoughts are pushing to close the gap. Grant nodded, his eyes narrowing. That's exactly what we need them to do. Order the Hammerfall group to deploy mines in the midsector. Tethered charges, set to detonate on proximity. They'll think it's an opening. Volkov let out a low chuckle, and they'll walk right into it. Outside the viewport, the chaos of battle churned like a storm. The Stellar Empire's ships advanced with brutal precision, their energy beams slicing through the blackness. Explosions erupted across the void as human vessels darted between the massive enemy ships, delivering calculated strikes before slipping back into the shadows. The cold emptiness of space was lit by bursts of fire and flashes of plasma, casting jagged shadows across the sleek hull of the Resolute Dawn. Grant's gaze remained fixed on the map. He could feel the vibrations of distant impacts through the deck, each one a reminder of the stakes. The air was heavy with sweat and tension, every breath laced with the metallic tang of recycled oxygen. He turned to Acker, his voice low but firm. Bring up the obsidian blade's position. The display shifted, revealing a cluster of ships hidden within the asteroid field near Proxima's second moon. The obsidian blade, humanity's stealth dreadnought, was the linchpin of Grant's strategy, a weapon the Stellar Empire couldn't see coming. Are they ready? Grant asked. Akers' fingers hesitated for only a moment. Captain Sterling reports all systems are green. They're awaiting your command. Grant allowed himself a brief, satisfied nod. Hold them in position. Not a move until Varok's fleet crosses the threshold. Volkov raised an eyebrow. You're betting everything on them committing to the central assault? Grant's gaze didn't waver. Varok's arrogance is his weakness. He thinks we're cornered. He doesn't know we've built the corner into a cage. As if on cue, the holographic map flared red. The Stellar Empire's capital ships surged forward, their spearhead formation cutting through the battlefield with devastating force. Human ships fell back in calculated retreats, their movements seemingly chaotic but guided by unseen threads. Sir, Aker said, her voice edged with urgency. They're accelerating. Dreadnoughts are breaking formation to target our flanks. Grant's lips curved into a faint smile. They think they've found an opening. Volkov, are the decoy stations primed? Volkov grinned wolfishly. Primed and ready. They'll get a hell of a surprise. Grant's voice carried across the deck, calm yet electric. Initiate Phase 4. Engage the decoy stations. On the display, a cluster of human mining platforms lit up with sudden activity. To the Empire's sensors, they appeared as critical command outposts. Within moments, the enemy dreadnoughts adjusted their trajectories, their weapons zeroing in on the apparent targets. And then the stations exploded. The tethered charges detonated in a chain reaction, sending shock waves rippling through the void. Empire ships caught in the blast were shredded by shrapnel and debris, their shields overwhelmed in an instant. The silent fireworks of destruction illuminated the darkness, a fleeting moment of brilliance before the void reclaimed its stillness. The bridge of the Resolute Dawn erupted in muted cheers, but Grant didn't move. His eyes remained locked on the display, watching as the remaining enemy ships regrouped. He could almost feel Varok's frustration radiating across the battlefield. "They'll adjust," Grant said, his voice cutting through the brief celebration. "And when they do, we need to be ahead of them. Aker, deploy the Phantom units to Sector 7. Volkov, prep the Obsidian Blade for its approach." Aker hesitated. "Sir, if we commit the Phantom units now, we won't have reserves for the next wave." Grant's gaze flicked to her, his expression unreadable. "There won't be a next wave, Lieutenant. Not for them." The tension in the room thickened, a tangible force that pressed against the skin. Aker nodded, her fingers resuming their frantic work. Volkov muttered something under his breath, but the hint of a smile remained on his lips. On the map, the Phantom units, a squadron of advanced stealth fighters, slipped into the void, their movements invisible to all but the most sophisticated sensors. They wove through the chaos like shadows, their presence a whispered threat on the edges of perception. Grant leaned forward, his fingers brushing the edge of the display. "Varok's formation is breaking. That's our opening." The Resolute Dawn shuddered as a distant impact resonated through its hull. The air was charged with ozone, the faint crackle of static electricity dancing across the consoles. The ship's crew moved with practiced precision, their faces set in grim determination. And then, it happened. The Obsidian Blade emerged from the asteroid field, its black hull gleaming with an unnatural sheen. Its presence was like a predator stepping into the light, silent, deliberate, and undeniable. The Stellar Empire's ships hesitated, their movements faltering as they registered the new threat. Grant's voice was a blade, sharp and unyielding. "Fire the lance!" From the bow of the Obsidian Blade, a beam of searing light erupted, its intensity cutting through the void with lethal precision. The beam struck the Empire's flagship, piercing its shields and tearing through its hull. The explosion that followed was a supernova of fire and light, the shockwave rippling outward and scattering the remaining ships. The bridge of the Resolute Dawn was silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Grant straightened, his gaze fixed on the display as the enemy fleet began to crumble. Some ships turned to flee, their engines flaring in desperation. Others were caught in the chaos, their movements frantic and disorganized. Grant allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The trap had been sprung, the plan executed with precision. But his mind was already moving to the next step, the next challenge. "Volkov," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Prepare for pursuit. We're not letting them regroup." Volkov nodded, his grin returning. "Let's finish this." As the human fleet advanced, Grant's thoughts lingered on Varok. The High Commander's pride had been his downfall, but Grant knew the battle was far from over. Somewhere beyond the battlefield, the next move was already being planned, and Grant would be ready. The wreckage of the Stellar Empire's once mighty fleet drifted through the void, jagged fragments of hull plating catching the light of Proxima Prime's distant sun. The silence outside was absolute, the soundless aftermath of devastation. But within the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, the air crackled with tension, anticipation, and something more. Victory just within reach, yet not fully claimed. "Status report," Commander Eli Grant said, his voice steady but edged with a steel-like resolve. Lieutenant Nadia Aker scanned her console, her fingers trembling slightly from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Empire forces are in full retreat, sir. Remaining dreadnoughts are scattering toward the outer rim. Defensive positions are holding." Grant didn't respond immediately. He stared at the holographic map, where the glowing red markers representing enemy ships were steadily diminishing. Each flickering dot carried with it the weight of billions of lives spared, both human and alien. Yet his expression remained cold, calculating. "Volkov," Grant said, turning to his lieutenant commander, whose battered demeanor belied the fierce gleam in his eyes. "What's Varok's position?" "Flagships still active," Volkov replied, his voice gravelly like stone grinding against stone. "He's not running like the others. Looks like he's digging in just beyond the asteroid belt." Grant's lips curved into a faint smile, one devoid of warmth. "Of course he is. He doesn't know when to quit." Aker hesitated. "Sir, shouldn't we let them retreat? They're crippled. The Council will pressure the Empire into surrender. We've made our point." Grant's gaze flicked to her, his eyes unreadable. "This isn't just about making a point, Lieutenant. This is about ending the war before it starts again." The bridge fell silent. The hum of the ship's system seemed louder in the absence of voices, a constant reminder of the stakes that hung over them all. Outside, the remnants of battle painted the darkness with streaks of fire and ash, the ghosts of a conflict not yet finished. "Prepare the fleet for a final push," Grant ordered, his voice quiet but unyielding. "We end this now." Volkov grinned savagely. "With pleasure." The Resolute Dawn pivoted gracefully, its engines flaring as it led the remaining human ships toward the asteroid belt. The stars beyond blurred as the fleet accelerated, their trajectory locked onto the last stronghold of the Stellar Empire's fleet. Inside the flagship's bridge, the tension thickened, every breath heavy with unspoken fear and determination. Aker broke the silence. "If we press too hard, Varok might detonate his reserves. He could take half the fleet with him." Grant didn't flinch. "He won't. Varok's pride is a leash tighter than any chain. He'll want to face me head-on." As the human fleet emerged from the shadow of the asteroid belt, Varok's flagship loomed before them, a massive, jagged vessel bristling with weaponry. Its hull shimmered with the faint glow of active shields, a final barrier between the Empire's might and utter defeat. Grant's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Hail the flagship!" Aker hesitated only a moment before complying. The transmission crackled to life, and High Commander Varok's image filled the holographic display. His crimson eyes blazed with fury, his metallic skin reflecting the cold light of his ship's bridge. "Grant!" Varok snarled, his voice a low growl that reverberated across the connection. "Do you truly believe this victory is yours? That your pitiful species can outlast the Stellar Empire?" Grant stepped forward, his silhouette stark against the glow of the viewport. "I don't believe it, Varok. I know it." Varok leaned closer, his expression a mask of contempt. "Your arrogance will be your undoing. The Stellar Empire has stood for millennia. You are nothing but a fleeting anomaly, a species grasping at survival." Grant's voice was calm, deliberate, each word laced with a quiet intensity. "You're right about one thing, High Commander. We are survivors. And do you know why?" Varok's sneer faltered, just for a moment. "Because we never forgot what it meant to fight," Grant continued. "While your empire basked in complacency, we prepared. While your fleets polished their hulls for parades, we built weapons for wars that hadn't even started. You called us primitive because we didn't show you our teeth." Grant leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Now you'll see them." Varok's response was immediate, a guttural roar of rage as the transmission cut off. Outside, the Stellar Empire's flagship powered its engines, its weapon systems flaring to life. The final battle had begun. The void erupted with chaos once more. Energy beams and missiles crisscrossed the darkness, their brilliance lighting the black expanse in fleeting flashes. Human ships maneuvered with a deadly grace, their strikes precise and calculated. The Stellar Empire's vessels retaliated with desperation, their once coordinated movements devolving into frantic chaos. Grant's voice rang out across the bridge, sharp and decisive. "Target their shield emitters. Focus fire on weak points. We're not here to exchange blows. We're here to finish this." The Resolute Dawn surged forward, its weapons unleashing a torrent of firepower. Explosions rippled across the Empire's flagship as its shields faltered, cracks forming in its once impenetrable armor. On the human side, losses mounted, each destroyed ship a wound in the fleet's resolve. Yet they pressed on, their movements driven by a purpose greater than survival. Grant could feel it, the collective will of his crew, his people, a resolve born not of desperation, but of determination. Sir, their shields are collapsing, Acre reported, her voice tight with urgency. But they're charging their main cannon. It's aimed directly at us. Grant's jaw clenched. He turned to Volkov. Redirect auxiliary power to forward shields. Hold the line. Volkov nodded grimly. You've got it. The flagship's cannon flared with an intensity that seemed to consume the void itself. The beam tore through the darkness, a lance of searing light aimed squarely at the Resolute Dawn. The ship shuddered violently, its shields straining against the impact. Warning klaxons blared, the acrid smell of burning circuits filling the air. Grant's voice rose above the chaos. All weapons, fire on my mark. Acre, set a collision course. Acre's eyes widened. Sir, if we... Do it, Grant ordered, his tone unyielding. The Resolute Dawn surged forward, its hull glowing red-hot as it absorbed the cannon's fury. At the same time, its weapons unleashed a devastating salvo, tearing into the flagship's exposed core. The final explosion was blinding, a supernova of destruction that consumed the Empire's last bastion. When the light faded, the battlefield was still. The Stellar Empire's fleet was no more. The silence that followed was profound, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone who remained. Grant stood at the viewport, his expression unreadable. The faint glow of Proxima Prime illuminated his face, casting him in sharp relief. Behind him, the crew waited, their breaths held. We've won, Acre said softly, her voice trembling. Grant turned, his gaze sweeping across the bridge. No, he said quietly. We've survived, and that's what makes us human. His words hung in the air, a quiet declaration of triumph and resolve. Outside, the wreckage of war drifted, a testament to humanity's strength and the folly of those who underestimated it. And as the Resolute Dawn turned toward home, Grant's voice echoed in the silence. Let them think we are weak. Let them think they've seen all we have to offer, because the moment they forget who we are, we'll remind them. The stars beyond seemed to burn brighter, their light a silent witness to the truth. Humanity wasn't just a survivor of war, they were its architects, its masters, and they were ready for whatever came next.